Winnie and I are on a walk right now in this particularly like beautiful area. It's a nature preserve and it feels like a jungle. Like to me, this feels like Costa Rica, where I was a year ago last week. Anyway, I've been on these like particularly warmer days. I've been trying to get Winnie out for walks, but it's hard with the heat. I'm not a heat person. It makes me very cranky, to be honest, when it's too hot outside. So today is only in the mid 80s, so it's not too bad. So I decided to take a break from work and went and got myself a treat from Dunkin', and I've been enjoying grabbing Winnie and grabbing a little drink and coming to this little trail in this nature preserve by my house. The trail isn't very long, but it's really pretty in here. Just it's the closest thing to a jungle I can find in eastern Pennsylvania. But anyway, the forest is just really lovely here, and it's all shady, which is nice for the walk so it doesn't get too overheated. Sorry, it's hard to carry Winnie and my drink and my camera at the same time. I was thinking in the car on the way over here about how important where you live is to your general happiness and well-being. For me, my location where I live makes such a huge difference in my mood every day, in my outlook. I mean, personally, my health and wellness and happiness is really, really impacted by where I live. I have to be happy in my setting, in my location, to be, fulfilled with my life. And I've lived in a lot of places, and I have to say, there's just something about where I am right now in eastern Pennsylvania that's just very comforting to my heart, and it just feels really homey. I didn't grow up in Pennsylvania, but I grew up in the Northeast, so there's parts of it that feel very familiar. Some of the rural parts, I live like right on the cusp of town and farmland. So I get like the best of all the worlds. We have some beautiful farmland just north of my house. I like to drive up here. This is where I go to the farms to get my milk and my eggs and my locally made bread, and it's just really charming, and it's nice to have that bit of like, I spent a lot of time in the Southwest and in Texas and these rural parts of Mississippi and Florida, and there's also a little teeny bit of like country girl in me from those experiences, especially because even though those were not places that made me very happy, I tried to find things to appreciate about all of them, about all the places I've lived. And there is something about being a country girl that's appealing. I like the wide open spaces and rolling hills and farmlands and driving without congestion and stuff like that. So, there's stuff that I appreciate about everywhere that I've been, and I like recognizing that in where I am now. I also live right near this beautiful old town that was, developed in the 1700s, and Pennsylvania has a lot of these really old little towns and centers, and everything is so charming. There's all these beautiful stone buildings everywhere around. And Winnie, what are you doing? Come on, that's not our car. You can't get in that one. But yeah, we live in, Pennsylvania is just such an interesting place. I was just thinking about how where we live specifically, in a couple of random ways, it reminds me of France, which is so funny. France is one of my favorite places that I've ever visited. And I find myself sometimes when I'm driving through like the country around here, going through the town where I live. It's a very old town. It's from the 1700s, and the buildings are all old brick and stone buildings, and the town center is very charming, and you can just kind of see what it would have looked like hundreds of years ago when the streets were full of buggies and horses and things like that. And France felt very similar to me. It's physically beautiful. It's got these incredible pastoral countrysides to drive through or take the train through and appreciate. But then it also has these really interesting old like medieval towns with their own histories. that are like, you can't, like, I couldn't get enough of them. Every time I drove through a new little town, it was like, I don't know, they're all so charming and have all of this really interesting stuff to offer on their own. And so, yeah, sometimes just being where I live makes me remember France, and it feels nice to be in a sort of similar setting that has, kind of the same general feel and vibe, and it's just lovely. And sometimes I like to think about and be appreciative about that. Good girl, baby. Back home now, and I have, oh my goodness, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, I have 5 Fiverr orders that I just filmed earlier today that I have to edit and send off to my clients. So that's my job for the afternoon, but I have to move my printer. I have a printer under this desk, and Winnie likes to lay under the desk when I'm working, and she's like laying on the side of my printer. I don't know. It's weird. But anyway, it's just interesting to me about traveling and being really intentional and careful about settling down in the right place. I don't know too much about astrocartography, but I've heard about it and I've looked into my astrocartography because I think that that's really interesting. It's basically the astrology of place. And so depending on your astrology and when you were born and where you were born, there are basically like meridian lines similar to that based on the planets and planetary movement that will kind of like have created this map of the globe for you. And some of those lines are favorable for different aspects of your life. It's just similar in a lot of ways to how the aspects of your astrological chart can influence your personality, your natural inclinations and talents, and the things that are really resonate with you and the things that don't resonate with you, the things that might be more challenging in your life. There is a map of the planet that basically has all of that mapped out for you too. So if you go and live somewhere by one of your Mars lines, you might have certain difficulties, in the aspects that Mars is sort of oversees in your life. So I think that's really interesting. Something like if you're trying to be really intentional about where you live and where you travel in the world, that's definitely something to look into that I think is just fascinating. But I also think it's important to be investigatory about yourself, because the more information you have and the more you understand yourself, like information is power, you can make better decisions that are more resonant and that feel more intuitively right for you if you understand yourself better. So when I started doing a bunch of this self-reflection and self-discovery work, I found out a lot of things about myself that I think, I don't know if I ever would have actually like cognitively been able to recognize if it hadn't been pointed out to me, that have made a huge difference in my life. And if I had never realized it, I don't even know how much it would have held me back or how miserable I could have been if I had continued to try and live a life where I was working against those things, the things that I actually needed, or the things that were actually much more true to who I am on the inside, like my actual deep down soul. Like I need certain things, and I didn't always know that I needed those things because I hadn't done the work to figure that out yet. And so there were times in my life when I can look back and I was living a life where I just was not in alignment with who I am and what I need. And I was in places that didn't support that either. And if you're in a place that's actively like not supporting who you are and what you need, you're going to run up against frustration, and that can show itself in a lot of different ways in your life. There were places where I lived where I was depressed because of the situation in that location for me, or because the environment just wasn't what I needed, and it and it wasn't inspiring for me. It didn't make me feel creative. It made me feel tied down. It made me feel isolated. You know, just things like that. You could have been born in a place that has made you feel that way your entire upbringing. And then if you have, you know, the certain type of situations where you don't really feel like you can leave, maybe you'll never discover that the location and environment that actually makes you feel inspired and energized and hopeful and happy is in an entirely different ecosystem. You know, like maybe you're meant to be living in Stockholm or or the coast of southern France or South America. You know, like you would never know if you had never explored that potentiality for yourself. I just think like the more that we can investigate and know ourselves, the more information we have to make decisions that are more intuitive and more resonant and more intentional about how we live. Where we live is a huge part of that, and how we create our own happiness and fulfillment in life. I definitely had a victim mindset for a while because I was a military spouse, and a lot of the places that I ended up living, I didn't feel like I chose. I didn't feel like I had a lot of control over that, and I tried to go with the flow as much as I could and be open, and you know, home is wherever you are and bloom where you're planted, and all of that stuff is great. But at a certain point, it can't give you true fulfillment if you aren't in a place that is truly fulfilling to you. So for me, that definitely sparked some issues. I had some problems with depression in certain places, and I had some problems with anger in certain places. And when I removed myself from those situations and came somewhere where I did feel so much lighter and freer and more connected and more myself and more in tune with the things that I need and the things that I like and the things that make me me, it was like my entire world changed. So, you know, for me, moving to Pennsylvania was a fantastic, really important part of my story, because moving here was like realizing that I had the power to design my life to be the way that I wanted it, to be a life that worked better for me than a life that I had been living so much more passively before. I know it's not easy to move. Moving's difficult, it's expensive. Moving away from people, from your support system, from your family or friends can also be very difficult. I empathize a lot. You know, for me personally, like staying at home, I grew up in upstate New York in the Albany area, and it's a lovely area, and I like my friends and family there, but for me, staying there was never an option. Never. When I was a little girl dreaming of my life, never for a second did I dream of staying in upstate New York, in my hometown. That just wasn't what I was going to do. I just knew from the very beginning that that's not where I was meant to be, and that I was meant to explore and travel and see things and find myself in different places. And, you know, now that I know that I'm a Sagittarius moon, that makes a lot more sense. My soul, where I feel the most at home, and like me, the real me, is a seeker and a journeyer and someone who wants to experience and learn and continue to grow and progress in life. And you don't do any of those things by staying still or stagnant where you are. Now, just because that was right for me doesn't mean that that's right for everybody. Some people's purposes in life and some people's design is that of a person who is meant to bloom where they are planted. Truly. They will find themselves, they will find their purpose and their true fulfillment. They will grow to the greatest version of who they could be by staying planted and truly cultivating a beautiful, full, rich life within that tradition. That's not me, but that could be a lot of people, and that's great for you. But if you're someone who just stayed in your hometown because you didn't feel like you had any other option and you were uninspired and you didn't do a lot of work to try and figure out what might be better for you, that could be the wrong choice for you, and you could end up feeling so stifled and stuck and stagnant and depressed or frustrated or angry. I don't want that for anyone. I think an ideal world would be a world where we all have the freedom to explore what it is that is going to make us happy and fulfilled, and to have the support of the people in our lives, to have the financial ability and all of that, to at least just see what makes sense for you, see what makes you feel better, see what environment makes you feel the most alive. When I go back to upstate New York, it's nice to be there, but I don't feel alive. There's a lot of places that I've traveled in the world where I feel alive, where I would go back in a second, where I could imagine myself living or traveling through and staying for a while. And gosh, I think life can just be so magical and wonderful sometimes when you allow yourself to follow those things that give you that feeling. And thankfully, where I am right now, where I'm planted at the moment, is a place that gives me that feeling. And I feel inspired here and grounded and happy. And I love so many of the things about where I am. And a lot of that is because of experiences that I've had in other places. Some places make me more grateful for the things that I have here because I didn't have them in that location. Or other places that I've been, there's little bits about it that I loved so much, and then I see that reflected in my environment now, and it makes me happy. Yeah, I'm just having a day, I guess, where I'm sitting around and just being grateful for where I am and all of the places that I have been that brought me to this place. And glad that I've cultivated this practice of self-discovery to know myself better in order to be able to be intentional about where I am. And now I know for a fact, like, if for some reason I ended up in a place in the future, if I brought myself somewhere in the future that didn't feel good to me, that didn't have what I needed and wasn't making me happy, I know that I wouldn't stay there. In the past, I don't know if I would have made that same decision. If I'd have been able to recognize and speak up and advocate for myself enough to the point where I would be like, I need to leave and go somewhere else. But now I know that I'm in that place, and it feels empowering and it feels really nice. So I hope that maybe you might take a moment to think about what type of person you are and what type of things, features, physical features in the environment, what type of culture the person that is like you are might need to be happier, and search for them in the world around you and maybe in worlds farther away, because you never know where it will take you when you allow inspiration to guide your path. Okay, well, that's my talk for today. Thank you for joining me. Cheers with my Dunkin' Refresher. They're delicious if you have a Dunkin' near you. It's my go-to pick-me-up drink. All right, well, I will talk to you all again soon. Thank you so much for listening. Bye.